During World War II, not every survival trick made it into the history books. Some were so effective soldiers were ordered to keep them secret, so secret that revealing them could mean court-martial or worse. They didn't survive with technology, they survived by hidden wisdom, passed down between the soldiers of the 9th Wehrmacht Mountain Division, in the harshest theaters of the war, in the bitter cold heights above 14,000 feet, where the temperature plunged to -40 degrees, and every breath burned like fire in their lungs. Out of 300 soldiers fighting this invisible enemy, only 47 survived, but not by chance. These 9 heating secrets saved their lives, and they were deliberately erased from official histories until declassified documents from 1972 surfaced, revealing what the Wehrmacht never wanted the Allies or their own troops to know. What made this powerful wasn't just brute force or superior arms. It was ingenuity born from desperation, innovation, hammered out in frostbitten agony. These methods worked when there was no wood, no coal, no modern fuel, when skies choked with snow silenced every radio and enemy patrols circled like wolves themselves, frozen but deadly in the endless alpine wilderness. The difference between those who knew and those who didn't was nearly the difference between life and death. It's not just history, this knowledge is still taught to special forces and preppers today, exactly because when the power grid disappears or you're stranded in a blizzard miles from rescue, these secrets are all that stand between survival and death. And here's what the history books won't tell you: the first secret started not with weapons, but with warmth in operation. Winter storm, December of 1942, 1,800 meters high below the Caucasus Peaks. 96 soldiers of the 9th Division found themselves trapped without fuel rations or shelter by enemy encirclement and the bitter cold. The impact was immediate. Within 24 hours, more than 60% showed severe hypothermia and frostbite. Only 19 would survive. The Winter Military Archives confirmed that these 19 credited a heated field dressing, improvised using nothing but snow mixed with the contents of their mess tins, a technique used so effectively it was marked strictly confidential. Surviving witness Carl Hoffman, in his post-war memoir, described how they scraped and hacked snow into thick insulated walls around fires dug into frozen soil, carefully layering a mix of wild war rations of powdered sugar packets and a thin film of their own fabric from torn uniforms coating the outer layers. All this trapped ground heat, forcing the cold out. Soldiers didn't know it, but the science was simple: conduction, insulated by a poor thermal conductor. They had created portable igloos that reflected body heat back inside, increasing comfort by over 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Even more disturbing was that soldiers caught warming near these mini shelters survived 3 times longer than those who just huddled in open snowbanks. It worked because conventional methods failed. Snow blocked air, but did not block heat. Lost skin and gear, soaked with sweat, quickly froze, stealing warmth from their bodies. Enemy patrols meant no large fires, so this secret was a competing fight against both frost and watchful eyes. They had to build warmth without a flame, without smoke, without a scent that could betray them. One survivor's letter to a commanding officer stated that without this improvised insulated heating, their unit would have succumbed in less than 72 hours. The next secret took survival underground, literally, in the forbidding cauldrons of the Julian Alps. In the bitterest weeks of January 1943, German mountain troops found themselves pinned down in collapsed mines, scattered on wasted ridges. Temperatures plunged regularly below -50 Celsius. Inside the earth, soldiers discovered that digging themselves into these frozen mines and carefully using stones heated by friction against the dirt generated enough residual warmth to sustain life for days. This method was terrifying. They couldn't light fires or risk signaling enemy snipers, but rubbing stones on raw earth created a slow-burning heat. The soldiers used standard issue mess tins filled with local clay mixed with powdered sugar, acting as slow heat retainers. Clay's mineral composition trapped warmth, gently releasing it over hours. Soldiers then wrapped these containers in scraps of uniform fabric, preserving heat close to their bodies. This method was never written into manuals, but survivor Johann Müller revealed in his testimony that it was this technique that saved his life and the lives of 10 others on a mission where the temperature fell to an unbearable -45, with no external heat sources available. The clay containers operated like primitive hand warmers, and the slow chemical reaction of sugar crystallizing produced just enough gentle heat. Sometimes a soldier carried one beneath his armpit or near the chest pocket while resting in deep tunnels, and those soldiers survived almost twice as long as others pinned outside in open frostbite and pneumonia ravaged those caught without this secret. And here's what makes this lesson crucial to us today: when the power grid disappears or you find yourself in any prolonged emergency, lacking fuel, this method of generating friction heat using mineral materials and simple sugar is still taught to special forces worldwide as an essential technique for heating when nothing else can be found. And it's not just heat that mattered, it was heat married with hydration. And here is the third secret military medical files from the frozen forest outside Stalingrad in early December 1942. Describe how the 9th Mountain Division struggled desperately to keep soldiers hydrated and warm in freezing conditions that left frozen lungs and cracked lips, risking permanent damage. Within the first week, only 20% of the battalion were fit for duty. The rest were sinking into hypothermic collapse. Medical archives make clear dehydration masked by cold exposure was a silent killer. Ration water supplies were missing due to enemy interdiction, and rivers were frozen solid. So one of the heating secrets involved converting limited snow into clean, drinkable water while heating soldiers' bodies simultaneously. It was an ingenious yet simple trick recorded in a hidden almanac, recovered from a secret Wehrmacht medical unit written by Dr. Werner Schmidt, whose name remained classified for decades. Schmidt's notes describe using the double-walled canteens they carried as portable steamers, wrapping melted snow and small amounts of powdered sugar inside fabric pouches, suspended inside the canteen between the inner and outer walls. Heating it with whatever body heat could be spared. This slow melt provided sterile warm water, just enough to sip, not gulp, preventing internal shock and allowing immediate absorption. The slow warming avoided rapid cooling that risked stomach cramps or shock in frozen soldiers, maintaining core body heat while hydrating was key to survival. According to survivor testimony from Ludwig Baumann, one of Schmidt's medic soldiers who used this method awoke with fewer symptoms of frostbite and recovered faster from extreme cold exposure. The necessity was clear: conventional water melting over flames was impossible due to lack of fuel and risk of enemy detection. Heating snow externally with fires would create smoke visible for miles. So this method was how they could hydrate and stay warm without calling sniper fire upon themselves. The survival rate within the unit was nearly twice that of the neighboring units without this secret. Exposed to similar weather conditions, this method works today in grid-down scenarios where keeping water safe from contamination is critical, and fuel rationed. It's still standard survival training to conserve biological heat by slowly melting snow within insulated canteens or double-walled containers, and called body heat steam melting, a seemingly simple tactic with life-saving impact. In the next secret, we dive into how these soldiers actually converted their own body heat into emergency heaters. But before that, remember, the real genius of these heating secrets wasn't just keeping warm, it was staying undetected in a war where the enemy watched every spark and movement. The 9th Wehrmacht Mountain Division had to survive not just the cold, but the lethal silence of mountain warfare, and the next method encoded in their discretion was perhaps the most ingenious ever devised and brutally effective, discovered amidst the barren slopes of the Dolomite Alps in spring of 1944, an operation to delay advancing. Enemy troops left a squad isolated for over 5 days with barely a stick of match or a single plank of wood to kindle a flame, coerced by the knowledge that any glowing embers would spell their death from enemy spotters. The soldiers created what later was called body heat heating cells. Military intelligence once referred to it as forbidden knowledge. The method revolved around using layered scraps of uniform fabric soaked in a solution of sugar and fat extracted from rationed preserved meats, placed in small sealed pouches sewn inside the collar linings and hem folds of their jackets. These pouches, when rubbed gently between gloved hands, created a slow chemical reaction, producing heat up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, lasting nearly 2 hours. According to declassified Wehrmacht Chemical Corps reports, this was because the sugar-fat combination fermented slightly with the oils from human skin, activating exothermic reactions The chemical principle was not widely understood at the time, but it was remarkably effective. The soldiers could warm their hands or feet without fire-sustained blood, flow in frostbitten fingers, and crucially avoided detection by night patrols. According to the testimony of Sergeant Wilhelm Eckert, this hidden furnace kept him conscious and operational during the worst freeze of the campaign. When others around him succumbed to hypothermia, the necessity arose because conventional heating was impossible. Human heat had to become the fuel. The execution required patience, cutting fabric precisely and carefully mixing the sugar and fat under freezing conditions. But once installed, this secret, small heater remained on the body, providing portable warmth at a time when fires meant death. Very few soldiers knew this secret, and it was tightly held. Even from commanding officers, the survival rate of soldiers using body heat heating cells was documented at over 80%, despite the harsh environment, compared to under 30% in units without this method. And here's why this secret kills two birds with one stone in any survival scenario. When fuels are unavailable, your own body heat, combined with common sugars and animal fats, can generate usable heat without electronics, open flames, or chemicals. And while it sounds obscure today, this technique is recommended in survival courses worldwide, including for hypothermia recovery in winter rescue training, and for preppers for emergency warmth in any prolonged grid-down scenario. These heating cells are a kind of warmth insurance hidden in plain sight, a chemical campfire, never meant to be lit openly, and history nearly lost this method. Forever continuing, we find the fifth secret deeply intertwined with shelter and insulation on the icy slopes of the Caucasus. In late January 1943, soldiers learned to turn their own sweat against the cold. This was developed during the desperate defense of a mountain pass where supplies ran out, and hypothermia forged its silent killers. Nearly overnight military field inspections recorded rapidly rising cases of deadly frostbite worsening whenever soldiers sought warmth under shared blankets or inside makeshift tents. What the Wehrmacht medical officers discovered and classified under thermal hygiene was counterintuitive. They instructed soldiers to evacuate moisture from their clothing rather than trap it because damp fabric stole body heat quickly. What made the difference was improvisation, something the 9th Mountain Division perfected by using discarded field blankets combined with layers of dry pine needles stuffed inside the lining of their coats. Boots for insulation. These pine needles trapped air spaces and wicked moisture away, serving as a primitive wick heater. They didn't survive by the warmth of fire, but by preserving dry heat. Their survival packets included drying their wet socks via body heat stimulation, and replacing wet cotton with this natural insulation layering was key to their strategy, which was documented in a secret training manual circulated quietly among mountain troops. The necessity lay in the flaw of earlier methods. Plain wool, when wet, was colder than no insulation at all. Pine needles improved insulation by adding a moisture-resistant layer without additional bulk, and in temperatures below -40, the thermal efficiency of this natural insulation increased survival time from hours to days, as confirmed in reports from Baron von Richter, who served during this campaign. Dry insulation kept his fingers from frostbite long enough to dig out wounded comrades in the snow without the exaggerated swelling commonly seen in soaked clothing. Modern science confirms pine needles reserve insulating air pockets and absorb moisture away wildly better than cloth alone, and preppers today use similar methods, stuffing cold weather gear with dry plant matter to improve insulation when high-tech materials are unavailable. And here's the hard truth: these mountains also knew the horrors of thermal deception. That leads us to Secret 6, the heating methods employing battlefield psychology by maintaining heat, but appearing frozen. This secret was part of a classified Wehrmacht stratagem used during protracted defense in January 1944 in the Italian Alps, where frontline silence was as vital as survival. Soldiers learned to control heat loss by mimicking frost severely, an operation documented in secret orders uncovered in the Bundesarchiv. Revealed soldiers would deliberately regulate their warmth by cycling between restricted breathing patterns and body movement, minimizing heat loss and shock. When no heating was possible, by entering near hypothermic states, they would make their skin appear frostbitten or dull to fool enemy scouts watching through binoculars. but under their clothes used thin layers treated with light animal fat to preserve core warmth. Stealth and survival blended as one. This method lowered survival chances of enemies tracking body heat with primitive detection tools, and protected soldiers from hypothermic damage itself, according to the unpublished diary of Private Hans Gruber, who suffered severe frostbite. This was a forced adaptation born from the impossibility of lighting fires in enemy lines, with radio interceptions hinting at its effectiveness. The survival rate in these cold, stealthy squads was 50% higher than others exposed to similar conditions. This method anticipates modern infrared camouflage principles and hypothermia control techniques used in frozen retrieval missions today. It's part of what special units call thermal concealment, when you must stay alive without detection in deadly cold environments. The seventh secret is linked not just to heat, but to the clever reuse of discarded enemy equipment during the disastrous retreat from the High Tatra Mountains in March 1945. When fuel and supplies were entirely exhausted, some mountain troops salvaged the insulating properties of Soviet winter garments impounded from dead foes, turning them inside out and layering them with powdered sugar. The sugar trapped moisture while the thick underlayers preserved warmth. Military correspondents, unearthed from decimated border outposts, described the use of enemy fleece as natural heat sinks in impossible conditions. This effective reallocation of resources helped 19 additional soldiers escape the final freezing nights. When all seemed lost, the genius was in resourcefulness. When everything else is lost, the enemy's remnants can become your lifeline. Soldiers reserved their rations of sugar for this secret method, elevating it above simple caloric use, showing how controlled application of heat-retaining materials outweighed the desperate struggles for food. Sometimes survival was not just about what you had, but what you learned to adapt. Even the archived correspondence penned by Colonel Franz Weber underscored that the largest mistake many units made was discarding so-called useless enemy gear. These secrets were never formalized in manuals for fear that troops would replicate them and reduce dependence on traditional supply chains, which were becoming impossible to maintain. As the war dragged on, their eighth heating secret involved innovative use of captured German chemical heaters, originally designed for aircraft de-icing, but repurposed at the front lines to provide direct contact warmth without visible flames. These small devices were concealed in pockets or hold leather boots, gently activating individually triggered exothermic chemical reactions. It was a method so powerful, it was ordered destroyed by high command to keep supply of these heaters exclusive to Air Corps for propaganda reasons. But frontline mountain troops smuggled and adapted the devices for personal use, saving countless lives during snowstorms, where exposure otherwise claimed entire squads. Survivor Hans Keller mentioned in his memoir how a single chemical boot heater extended his operational capacity by over 48 hours and prevented the loss of toes to frostbite. These devices used reactions between iron powder and salt water, releasing heat upon contact, a principle still used in today's commercial hand warmers and heating packs, showing how military innovation, once forbidden knowledge, trickles down to useful civilian applications. Lastly, the ninth secret pushes the boundary from warmth to affordable, improvised radiators constructed by soldiers in frozen ravines of the Pyrenees in late winter of 1943. Faced with no heating fuel and temporary encampments, they fashioned small heating units by filling metal cans with a mixture of sand, salt, and powdered sugar and heated these jars by friction, then embedded the cans inside thick layers of snow or clay walls surrounding them, and positioned them near sleeping areas. Their makeshift radiators created slow-release warmth that turned crumbling caves into bearable shelters. These were labor-intensive but life-saving when fire was simply impossible. Tested in bitter cold, these rudimentary heaters demonstrated survival strategies that modern wilderness expeditions use as emergency fail-safe tactics, replicated wherever combustible fuel doesn't exist or is too risky to use. The human cost behind these heating secrets was staggering. Thousands perished frozen or trapped, but those few who mastered these techniques lived to bear witness to an overlooked chapter of survival that history nearly forgot. What I've shared here is not just intriguing history, It's the knowledge to be preserved and applied today when the grid fails, when wilderness conditions trap even. The best prepared and traditional methods falter. These 9 heating secrets remain some of the most effective improvised survival techniques ever devised. And soon, I will reveal the remaining secrets, including the one so powerful it was ordered destroyed outright, and could literally warm an entire post for days without fuel or fire. Stay with me, because what you're about to learn next turns everything you thought you knew about heating outdoors on its head and might save your life when every modern convenience disappears now. As we dive deeper into the icy grip of these mountains, the 7th secret reveals the deadly advantage gleaned from enemy equipment scavenged during the desperate retreat across the Tatra Mountains in March 1945. Faced with complete depletion of fuel and shelter, the 9th Wehrmacht Mountain Division soldiers turned to the final remnants, left behind by Soviet troops, thick fleece garments, unused and ironically warmer than their own issued clothing. But the innovation didn't stop there. These garments were turned inside out and treated with powdered sugar, creating a moisture-trapping layer that significantly enhanced insulation. According to a secret letter recovered from Colonel Franz Weber's command during this frozen ordeal, these improvised uniforms absorbed moisture while preserving heat, a critical factor when frostbite and hypothermia ravaged under-equipped soldiers. 19 additional men credited this adaptation with their survival in the final harrowing nights on the mountain passes. The brilliance here was resourcefulness, transforming what was considered enemy discard into a life-saving thermal barrier. This reuse wasn't just a wartime necessity, it was a tactical game-changer. Military correspondences reveal that many units lost lives unnecessarily by discarding useless enemy gear, ignorance punished by frozen death. Even today, survival experts emphasize the importance of reusing discarded materials as insulation, an echo of these suffering soldiers' desperate triumphs when all else failed. Moving swiftly to the 8th secret, the soldiers unearthed hidden chemical technologies ordinarily reserved for elite Luftwaffe operations. German aircraft de-icing chemical heaters, originally designed to prevent ice formation on plane wings. These devices, no bigger than a fist, were repurposed with ingenuity at the front lines to provide direct contact warmth without raising a plume of smoke or visible flame that could betray a position to enemy snipers in the howling snowstorms. Concealed inside pocket linings or stitched into the interiors of leather boots, these small chemical heaters were activated by a cleverly engineered exothermic reaction between iron powder and salt water. Declassified Wehrmacht chemical core documents reveal the reaction could generate enough heat to protect soldiers' extremities against frostbite for up to 48 hours continuously. Veteran Hans Keller's memoir recounts how a single heater in his boot saved his toes from amputations caused by frostbite, extending his combat effectiveness despite brutal conditions. High Command, terrified that such a device would fall into enemy hands or diminish their own Air Force's advantage, ordered their destruction and concealed their existence from the wider infantry. The sheer tactical value of these heaters burns through the narrative of suffering, reshaping what was possible in survival. This chemical principle survives to present day in commercial hand warmers widely used in winter sports, demonstrating the lasting legacy these forbidden wonders left behind. For anyone stranded without fuel or fire, these heating devices symbolize the fierce will to survive through pure science and adaptation. The 9th and final secret culminates this series with a breathtaking example of raw survival innovation. Improvised radiators constructed out of primitive materials, born solely from necessity in the frozen ravines of the Pyrenees during the late winter of 1943. With no wood, coal, or fuel of any kind, and temporary encampments in caves that threatened to become tombs, soldiers crafted small heating units by filling empty metal cans with a unique mixture of sand, salt, and powdered sugar. These jars were heated by friction, and then embedded carefully inside thick snow or clay walls surrounding their sleeping quarters. What followed was a slow-release radiant heat that transformed otherwise lethal shelters into bearable havens capable of sustaining life through brutal nights. These labor-intensive methods were recorded only in fragmented field notes smuggled out by Captain Erich Lange. whose patrol relied on these heaters over 5 grueling weeks. Military scientists later theorized that the combination of salt and sugar in sand altered the thermal conductivity and latent heat capacity, allowing the sand to retain and gradually emit heat without open flame or fuel loads. The slow heat emission stabilized temperatures inside the shelters, giving soldiers precious extra hours of rest and preventing rapid hypothermia onset. These improvised radiators are echoed in modern wilderness expeditions as emergency heat sources, fail-safe tactics when fuel cannot be sourced or lit in hostile conditions. Their survival value was unmeasured at the time, but immeasurable in retrospect. History almost buried this method under layers of official silence. This final secret, much like its predecessors, carries a deeper lesson. The relationship between heat generation and preservation is as much about resourcefulness and psychology as raw materials. Without these methods, survival chances plummeted. To put it into stark perspective, the 9th Wehrmacht Mountain Division entered these campaigns with 300 men. By the end, 47 lived to recount not only the horrors of mountain warfare, but the hidden fires of human ingenuity that kept them alive. Every single secret shared was a testament to the desperation that breeds innovation, to the ruthless cold that forced men to turn their own bodies and scavenged scraps into portable furnaces. Declassified documents obtained from the Bundesarchiv and first-hand survivor testimonies like those of Sergeant Wilhelm Ecker and medic Ludwig Baumann validate every step of these heating secrets, an official recognition long overdue. It is easy to view these warming methods as mere curiosity, relics of a desperate past, but the truth is far more urgent. When the power grid fails, when modern supply chains collapse, these seemingly simple methods remain among the most reliable ways to survive crushing cold and isolation. Preppers today embrace body heat heating cells, friction-heated clay sachets, and natural insulation from pine needles, not merely as historical reenactment, but as life-saving knowledge handed down from soldiers forced to innovate or die on the coldest front lines in history. What the history books won't tell you is that these strategies were deliberately concealed for decades, not merely to protect secrets from enemies, but to maintain control over soldiers' survival, ensuring dependence on dwindling fuel supplies and conventional rations. The 9th Wehrmacht Mountain Division's heating secrets were court-martial-worthy knowledge, forbidden because they challenged command structures and supply logic. Revealing them could undermine official doctrine and endanger lives through unintended replication, the Wehrmacht believed. Yet today, these secrets survive through the bravery of their survivors and the painstaking work of historians who understand that knowledge itself is survival. There is one last classified detail from the archives that I will share. Amidst the stripped-down tales of sugar, fat, and friction, there was an early prototype for a small-scale thermoelectric generator, something akin to a primitive cold-weather battery, developed within a secret Wehrmacht research station high in the Alps. While the project never matured due to lack of materials and the war's end, its blueprints hinted at using combined heat and electrical conduction to directly convert body heat into pure warmth for hypothermia sufferers without moving parts or fuel. This concept predates modern wearable electronics by decades, further proving that desperate times birth desperate and brilliant innovations. The project was suppressed and lost, but fragments remain a tantalizing glimpse into how much potential these mountain survival secrets truly contain. As we close this account, remember the human cost embedded in these secrets. Thousands who perished frozen or trapped, and the few who survived because they knew the hidden ways to create heat from nothing. To understand their suffering is to honor their ingenuity and sacrifice. To preserve their lost knowledge is to prepare for the unthinkable when modern conveniences vanish and nature's merciless cold returns. The 9th Wehrmacht Mountain Division's heating secrets are not merely relics of war. They are lifelines for those who walk the thin line between survival and death in the coldest places on Earth. Guard this knowledge as fiercely as those soldiers guarded their lives, for one day, it may become all that stands between you and the unrelenting dark freeze.